So yesterday we started chapter 11 on digestion, and we talked about the main reason for your digestive system, why we have it, which is basically to allow us to break down our food stuff so we can take it in and use it for energy, and also to have building blocks to make the things that our cells need to do their work. We talked about the different phases of digestion, types of digestion, whether it's mechanical or physical or chemical, the 6 essential nutrients that we have to take in and be able to digest and absorb. And then this was just an overview of the fact that the smaller things, the vitamins, minerals, and water, can be absorbed directly as they are, but the bigger ones, like carbohydrates, proteins, lipids, have to be broken down into smaller molecular units. So that's chemical digestion, and it's kind of reactions called hydrolysis reactions, if you remember. So part of one of the case studies deals with talking about the different enzyme actions. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that during this video. In the first class, we also did an overview of the digestive tract and the accessory organs that are important. We looked at the mouth cavity and started looking basically at each region and what kind of happens in that region. So we looked at the mouth cavity and how your cheeks and your hard and soft palate and your tongue help out. We looked at the types of teeth and the functions of those different types of teeth. We're called heterodonts because we have different types of teeth, so we can eat different kinds of food. They all have different jobs. A shark would be a homodont because they are all the same. Their teeth are all the same. Okay. We looked at an individual tooth and the parts of a tooth and the jobs of those parts. And then we took a look at the salivary glands that release saliva into your mouth. We do produce a lot of saliva in a day. And in the saliva there's mucins, which help to moisturize the food. That might help with your assignment. The enzyme that's found in saliva is salivary amylase. So we'll talk today about salivary amylase and what it does. And we talked yesterday about the fact that amylases are a category of enzymes that work on carbohydrates. And that the name in front of the amylase says basically where it's being made. So amylase that's made in the salivary glands is called salivary amylase. If we're talking about amylase that's made by the pancreas, it'd be called pancreatic amylase. But they have the same job, which is to work on carbohydrates and break them into smaller molecules. So we looked at the 3 different salivary glands and we labeled them. So the parotid gland is the one by your ear. Submandibular, your mandible is your jawbone, so it's under your jawbone. And sublingual, lingual refers to your tongue, so that's the one that's under your tongue. And they're on both sides. So then we labeled them on the diagram. In the last part of the class, you started building your study tool, your body. And if you do a good job of it, I would suggest that to save you a little bit of time, instead of, you can always cut out your own body and make your own. That's the same. But you could take a picture of it and then use it in your phone as a study tool. Okay, if you have a phone. You could just take a picture with your camera if not. So today we're going to talk about, start with the enzyme action in the mouth. So the enzyme that is produced in your saliva is, we said, salivary amylase, and amylases work on carbohydrates. So the only type of nutrient that's going to be broken down into smaller bits in your mouth is carbohydrate. There's no enzymes in saliva that's to work on protein, and there's none to work on fat. So the only thing that's acted on in your mouth are the carbohydrates, okay, in terms of enzymatic action. So we start off with a complex polysaccharide, like starch. Okay, so that means it's got a whole bunch of monosaccharides stuck together. So we call it a polysaccharide, and it's a complex one, so it's really long. And it's broken down into smaller polysaccharides called dextrins. sorry. That's my little Charlie bear. He's up and active now, so it's a little harder to do much of this for any length of time. But we will try. Okay, so starch is going to be acted on by salivary amylase. Other complex polysaccharides that we get from other food types would also be acted on by salivary amylase, with the exception of cellulose, because our enzymes won't break down cellulose. So we'll talk about it a little bit later. But so salivary amylase breaks down complex polysaccharides into smaller polysaccharides called dextrins and disaccharides like maltose. Okay? So later in the digestive tract, these dextrins, the smaller polysaccharides, will be broken down into disaccharides like maltose and lactose and sucrose. And then by the end, they'll all be broken down into monosaccharides. So glucose and fructose and galactose. Okay, so what happens in the mouth is basically complex polysaccharides are broken down by salivary amylase to give you dextrins, which are smaller polysaccharides. Okay, so the next part talks about swallowing. So basically your tongue helps with this action. It helps to push your food into a ball called a bolus. And remember your soft palate is going to move up as the bolus pushes back so that your food doesn't go out your nose. Your trachea is going to move up so that the epiglottis kind of covers it over, that special flap to prevent you from choking. And then if you look at this picture, the walls in front of the food ball or bolus will expand, and the walls behind the muscles will contract to kind of push it along. So it's a rhythmic action by the smooth muscles that line your esophagus. We don't think about it once it gets going down. So it's controlled by our involuntary control parts of the brain. And it's called peristalsis, this type of movement. Same kind of movement happens along your intestines, okay? But in your intestines, it's kind of unique because it goes forward and back, forward and back, forward and back, all the way along to give more chance for digestion absorption. But thankfully, it only goes one way in your esophagus, so you don't have that feeling like you're going to throw up. Okay, so it's involuntary, like it says. And there's a valve called the cardiac valve, or the lower esophageal sphincter, or valve. So sometimes you'll hear a valve be called a sphincter, or a sphincter be called a valve. They're referring to the same kind of thing. So in your case study, you learned of the valve at the bottom of your esophagus, just at the top of your stomach. So case study 1 talks about that. And I believe in that one it calls it the lower esophageal sphincter because it's down at the bottom of the esophagus. They also call it the cardiac valve because it's at the part of the stomach that's closer to your heart. So right here, this would be where the cardiac valve is. So it's kind of close to your heart. And the lower esophageal sphincter, or cardiac valve, is the valve that is often affected when someone has acid reflux. And that's kind of what your case study was about. So we're going to move on to the stomach. Okay, the stomach is, if you look, it's J-shaped. And if you open it up and you look inside of it, you would see folds in it called rugae. And that's kind of important because those folds increase the surface area and they also allow your stomach to expand so that if you get more food, then it can get bigger and hold more food. On average, it holds about 1.5 liters and it's surrounded by 3 layers of muscle. Remember, I was talking about how the stomach is so important for mechanical or physical digestion because it acts by kind of churning, mashing your food around. So there's 3 different types of muscle that are in the smooth muscle around your stomach. And they mix food in all directions. So that kind of mashes it together. And by the end, the food turns into this like mush, almost liquidy mush that can go into your small intestine. So that's a form of physical digestion. Okay, so in the mouth, we had type of physical digestion by your teeth, because they chew your food and break it down into smaller pieces. And also in your mouth, you had chemical digestion by salivary amylase. In your stomach, you have mechanical digestion or physical digestion by the action of the muscles of the stomach, mashing your food particles, mixing them in all directions. We also have some chemical digestion, so we're going to talk about that too. There's 3 types of cells in the glands that line your stomach. So when we talk about your stomach, sorry, when we talk about your stomach, we refer to it like, when we talk about your lungs, we say pulmonary. When we talk about your heart, we say cardiac. When we talk about your stomach, we say gastric. Okay, so the glands that line your stomach that are found along the walls of your stomach are called gastric glands. And they're found in gastric pits, which are kind of like almost like little holes down into the sides of your stomach. There's 3 types of cells that are found there. I'll help you in a couple minutes, okay, Charlie? Okay, thank you. There's 3 types of cells that are found there. There's mucus cells, which, like the name suggests, produce mucus. And it's really super important that we have a really good mucus layer, because the other cells, so the parietal cells, release HCl, and HCl stands for hydrochloric acid. Our stomach is super acidic inside. So there's a space inside there called the lumen. It's just a cavity, a space where the food goes into. And so all this acid is being produced and put out into the lumen. And it's got a lot of reasons for being there, but our cells that are on our stomach need to be protected, because acid can kind of eat through the cells. So we make this mucus in order to protect you from the acid. And then the 3rd type of cells are the peptic cells, or which produce, like the name suggests, it starts with pep. So they produce pepsinogen. And pepsinogen, remember we talked about fibrinogen? Ogen on the end means it's inactive. To get the name of the active protein, you drop off the ogen. Okay, so the peptic cells produce this pepsinogen, which is an inactive form of an enzyme. As soon as the enzyme goes out into the space where it's really acidic, the acidity activates it. So then it becomes pepsin. So the cells produce pepsinogen. That's what they actually make. Okay, so be careful on your assignment. The pepsinogen is inactive. Once it's out in the lumen and it's in the acidic environment, then it'll become pepsin, which is an enzyme. We're going to talk about what pepsin works on. Sorry. So the gastric glands release all this stuff, the mucus and the hydrochloric acid and the inactive enzyme. So those together are called gastric juice, because it's made in the stomach by the gastric glands. So gastric juice, they release it into the space called the lumen. Okay, and once it's in that space, the pepsinogen becomes active. Okay, so I think on here there were a few more things you could label. And if you have your body labeled by the time you come back on Thursday, then you'll have an easier time doing your body project. Okay, so we had finished labeling down to the esophagus. So here's the esophagus. Okay, remember the green things are just there for reference. So the esophagus Oh, there, the esophagus empties into the stomach. Okay, so food travels down the esophagus into the stomach. There's a valve at the top. Remember the cardiac or the lower esophageal valve. So the cardiac valve or lower esophageal valve, or you could use the word sphincter instead of valve. So the J-shaped organ is the stomach, and then there's a valve at the end of the stomach. This is the pyloric region of the stomach. So this valve is called the pyloric valve or the pyloric sphincter. And it controls movement of the pasty stuff from the stomach into the small intestine. It'll release about a teaspoon at a time, and it'll let it go into the small intestine for more digestion. This is a close-up. So it's showing, here's the stomach. Let me see if I can zoom in. Okay. So there you can see the folds. So those are the rouge that allows it to expand. There's the pyloric sphincter and the cardiac sphincter or lower esophageal sphincter or valve. Okay, if I take a piece of the wall of the stomach and I blow it up, then this shows this is the gastric pit that goes down, and the gastric glands include all these types of cells. So we have mucus cells that produce the mucus, we have chief cells, okay, and we have parietal cells. So here they call them chief cells. It's just another name for the peptic cells. Okay, so the peptic or chief cells produce the pepsinogen. They come out here, and once they get out into the lumen, the hydrochloric acid activates activates the pepsin. So hydrochloric acid activates pepsinogen to become active pepsin. That's all it's showing. So that's the action in the stomach. And this is just summarizing it in words. So hydrochloric acid is produced by the parietal cells. It lowers the pH and activates pepsinogen. But another job it has is it destroys pathogens. So most of the pathogens don't like an acidic environment. So it helps. It's one way to protect us from getting sick. It also helps to unfold proteins so that the enzyme pepsin can do its job, which is to break them down into smaller peptides. The mucus that's produced makes a mucus layer that protects our cells that line our stomach. And you'll learn later that ulcers result from something happening that causes that mucus layer to not be complete. It means that the acid can burn away at the cells in your stomach, and it's really painful. Pepsinogen is the inactive form of the enzyme pepsin. It's produced by the peptic or chief cells, and it's activated by the hydrochloric acid. So these are just summarizing what we just talked about. Okay, this is showing pepsin's action. Okay, so it occurs in the stomach. Proteins that are in the stomach will be unfolded by the hydrochloric acid, and then the pepsin will act on them to break them down into peptides. So they're kind of longer peptides. Okay. This is just a reminder of what proteins are like. So proteins are made up of amino acids. Reminder. Okay, the amino acids are called so because they have an amino group and a carboxylic acid group. The amino acids are strung together in what's called a peptide bond. So this is a polypeptide because there's got a whole bunch of peptide bonds holding it together, and that makes it fold a certain way. To make it form, we remove water, but to break it, we add water. Remember, a hydrolysis reaction. So that was just a reminder of what they're like. If we were to break it down, there's a peptide bond. If we add water, then it's going to break this apart. The OH has to go on here, And the H has to go on here because an amino group is an NH2. It has two H's, see? And the OH goes on here to make this the carboxylic acid end of what's left. So this little peptide is made up of 1, 2, 3 amino acids, and this one has just one now. So that's kind of the basics of how the protein digestion happens. So we're going to stop there, and we'll make a new video for the small intestine